This is Miguel.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
How do we know it's you?
I'm really good looking.
Supervisor Elliott, is that you on the phone?
Morning. How long are we anticipating?
Good morning. Kathy Miller's on the line.
Good morning, Supervisor Miller. In just 1 minute, we'll get started with the meeting. I'll let you know.
Perfect. Thank you.
Supervisor Elliott, are you on the line as well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Chair Miller, whenever you're ready to start the meeting.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. This meeting is now called to order at 9:02. We will now have a moment of silence, silent reflection, or silent prayer. Thank you. Supervisor Elliott, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. For the record, this is the emergency board meeting of the San Joaquin County Board of Supervisors of June 3rd, 2020. Well, it's not on here, but I'm going to ask the clerk of the board to please call roll now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to begin with the members that are in person for the meeting with Supervisor Patty,
Present.
Supervisor Nguyen,
Here.
and for board members that are participating telephonically, Supervisor Villapudua,
Here.
Supervisor Elliott,
Here.
and Chair Miller.
Here. Thank you. We will now call for public comment. Is there anyone, member of the public present, that wishes to deliver public comment, or to the clerk, have we received any written comments?
Madam Chair, we do have 2 public comments that were received. And these were received via email, and I'll read those now. The first public comment is from Richard Kelly. I am very concerned about illegal dumping in the Stockton area, particularly the Calaveras River from Highway 99 to I-5 and also the Smiths Canal. The second problem is the homeless that use our water as a toilet and a dump and compromise our levee systems. We need strict enforcement for individuals caught illegally dumping, seize or impound the vehicles used that will change the culture. If you drive around Stockton, seems to be a new normal that many people have vehicles with no license plate. Those people need to be cited. They are typically the ones involved in criminal activity. The taxpayers have to abide by the law. It's time elected officials realize the homeless shouldn't steer the ship for the community. And the second comment reads, with the governor allowing the county to open this phase on an individual basis, isn't it time to allow our nail salons to open as our hair salons have? Many of us use pedicures out of necessity, not just for cosmetic purpose. To avoid nail removals in podiatrist offices and potential infections, both painful conditions for us who suffer from them. And Madam Chair, that concludes the public comments received for today.
Thank you. If there's any member of the public listening, I'd like to remind you that if you send in your public comment during this meeting, we appreciate if you will limit them to 250 words or less, but you may submit them by sending an email to the clerk of the board at cobrecords@sjgov.org. We ask for no personal attacks, and we will make every effort to read the comments prior to the close of this meeting. So the only thing on our agenda for this morning is a discussion item on general government, and I believe our county counsel is going to kick off this discussion. Mr. Miles?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This meeting is called according to Government Code Section 54956.5, which allows the board to meet in emergency session under certain circumstances. One of those circumstances is when a majority of the board finds that there's a risk of an activity that severely impairs public health, and that's the reason that I have requested this meeting today, and to specifically ask that the board authorize counsel file a complaint in court seeking a restraining order injunction against Tony Noccetti and the Tony Noccetti Group Incorporated to prohibit the holding of events at their racetrack until such time as the state authorizes such activities. What I'll ask you to do today is 2 things. One is to find that there is an emergency as defined by the code section, and also authorize me to file the complaint. On May 29th, the Public Health Office received a call from an individual who was who was in San Diego, and he was calling to see if a race was authorized to be held at the Stockton 99 Speedway on June 6th. He indicated that he was coming with a group of 30 people, and that he was aware that people were traveling from as far away as Florida and Alabama to attend the race. Director Cunningham later spoke with Mr. Nossetti. He confirmed that the race was occurring on May 31st and also a race that was occurring on June 6th. The race on May 31st was without people in attendance, and he indicated that the race on June 6th would be with limited attendance. Ms. Cunningham informed him at that time that neither race was approved. It's our understanding that the race went ahead on May 31st. Yesterday, Dr. Park spoke with Mr. Nossetti. He confirmed that she informed him that neither race was approved and that holding the races would be a violation of both the state and the county local health orders. He indicated or stated that he would not cancel the June 6th race unless the governor or the state canceled races that have been reported to be scheduled in other locations throughout the state. Mr. Nossetti acknowledges that there is a specific risk involved with having the public attending this event. In fact, they've submitted to the county a protocol for holding these events, which includes having the public as well as the participants sign a release of liability, which specifically states, recognizes that in many locations, 8 health agencies have prohibited the congregation of groups of people. In fact, that's the case in California and in San Joaquin County. He further states that attending the track could increase your risk and your children's risk of contacting COVID-19, but asks that they acknowledge the contagious nature of COVID-19 and then voluntarily assume the risk of exposing their family, including their children, to such disease. The reason that we think that this rises to the level of an emergency is that the protocols also indicate that that they intend to make available up to 2,500 seats in at their race facility. So at least having that number of people in attendance. Given the fact that this is a race that's happening this weekend, our only opportunity is to get into court as quickly as we can, hopefully by the end of the day today, to seek a temporary restraining order to prevent that race from occurring. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Supervisor Wynn, I have a question. I understand Mr. Nossetti's desire to reopen and regain what he's lost over the past few months. My concern, though, is as I think as we've gone through this, we've tried to be as even-handed and fair to a variety of groups in regards to their reopening. I think both the governor and certainly Dr. Park have provided enough information that those types of businesses, whichever they happen to be, have some very rather strict guidelines to be able to reopen. Probably one of the biggest controversies we've been dealing with has been the obviously the worship services, and currently, unless something's changed in the last 24 hours, there is a limitation of 25% or 100 individuals, whichever's less. That's my understanding as far as those type of events, which is a gathering of individuals. I think unless there is some way to even the playing field in regards to gatherings of large numbers of people, I think we ought to stay with what we've already authorized, and in this particular case, there's a whole bunch of things, and I'm assuming that they've maybe outlined some protocol, but frankly, like with churches, I know that some of the pastors have talked about no gathering in the entryway or the foyer. Each row would exit separately, so you continue to maintain the social distancing. And with 2,500 people, I'm not sure how you can handle that, and I'm not sure there's any direction in their protocols that would line people up 6 feet apart out to the parking lot or whatever and allow them to single file go into the facility. So I just think, unfortunately, I'm sympathetic to businesses in general. I think if we're going to call it one way for one type of organization or group, I think we need to apply the same rules to everybody else. So that's just my observation.
Supervisor Patty.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Supervisor Patty requesting to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, County Council, I would inquire, have we, as you mentioned in your presentation, that there are racetracks operating in and throughout California as it is. Have you verified anything about that as has been presented of practices currently underway in the state of California?
So last week, I was provided with a list of places where allegedly races were occurring. There were 3 separate counties. I contacted the county councils in those 3 counties and was informed that they have not authorized any races.
They may not have authorized, but are they actually, are races happening there? It's my understanding that currently, right now, in the state of California, races are occurring. They may not be sanctioned by the governor, or they may not be sanctioned by the local government, the health director, or the county itself. But are you aware if those races are actually occurring?
I'm not aware if those races are actually occurring.
All right, for what I'm told, they are. And so I would suggest, and as Supervisor Wynn points out, you look at churches indoor, and if we look at the evolution of the science, we understand that COVID seems to be more at risk when you're indoors, as actually pointed out by Supervisor Wynn. Recent studies, we have established that when you're quarantined and indoors in closed environment, and in close contact, that seems to be more at risk versus being outdoors. And I would contend that if somebody is outdoors and if they're going to operate in an open field or open space, that we start to look at and apply perhaps common sense to evaluating what that emergency concern might be. And I at this time think it's non-existent. I do not support us taking any action to prevent anything happening at that location. I'm stand in support of this local business operator. I understand that they owe money to the state. The state's keeping them closed down, but yet they're owing rent to the state for a business they're not allowed to conduct, because they say that since they operate more than one location for racetracks. One being the state fair property. So I'm very concerned, obviously on the wheelhouse of interest for the governor and his many tasks. There are not many race tracks in and throughout the state of California or in very many counties. So this is kind of an outlier that the governor may not address for weeks or months from now, and weeks or months from now can ruin somebody financially. So I do not think it's a good practice for us in this county to interfere with what's going to happen on private property or by a venue that's going to be closed. In one instance, going to be closed to the public, and in other instances, if they are allowing people in the public, I would suggest they use a restricted number of participants and population to come into the facility, but I do not think we should take any legal action.
This is Supervisor Wynn again. Go ahead, Kathy. Go ahead.
I just have a quick question for Mark. Do we know what is the seating capacity? What is the legal limit on the Speedway?
I don't know what the legal limit. I did receive.
I know it's around 6,000, just for the record.
6,000?
Miguel, 6,000.
Okay.
He proposed, he wanted to have a racing Saturday. He was proposing 1,500 with 25% capacity.
Okay. Supervisor Wynn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't disagree with Supervisor Patty in regards to the outdoors versus the indoors. I think we still have 250 person limit. It's not there anymore, Dr. Park. Outdoors.
Can we confirm that, County Council, that the current public health order limits outdoor gatherings to no more than 250?
There is no such order for a limit of 250.
That's what I thought.
Indoors or outdoors in our county or the state order. The order for places of worship is that places of worship can have their buildings filled at a 25% capacity or 100 attendees, whichever is lower. So the same restrictions were given for protests. Other than protests in churches, there's no gatherings allowed. Not 250, not 100, not 10. It's still no gatherings of any size, and you must go to dine-in restaurants, shopping, and other outdoor experiences only with members of your own household.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Having heard that,
thank you.
I think one of the things that this is not unlike how many discussions we've had over the past 2 months in regards to opening businesses. And I guess, as we've talked about in the past and other counties have done on certain types of businesses, I guess we can go off the reservation and say this is fine. But I think one of the things that we have discussed, and I think County Council has documented and certainly presented in our meetings, is that we have no authority to go outside the bounds of the governor's orders or the California Public Health. Now, if we somehow get involved in this and approve it, or I guess fail to take action because we're aware of it occurring, I would assume that if anything negative occurs as a result of this race, the county will certainly be listed in regards to one of the defendants, primarily because we allowed something to occur which hasn't been provided guidelines by the governor's office or California Department of Public Health. So it doesn't matter what kind of business, and I'm certainly sympathetic to Supervisor Patty's desire to open businesses. I probably all of us are the same persuasion, but from a legal standpoint, I think we're kind of locked into the guidelines that are available. And now that we brought this to a special emergency meeting, and failure to take action is tacitly approving this activity, which apparently hasn't occurred. And I guess at some point in time, I'm sure some racing association will push the issue with the governor, and as opposed to months, I'm sure there may be a decision much sooner. So anyway, I just don't think that, from a liability standpoint or just common sense as far as the way we've done business up to now, that we want to break away and allow something to create a lot of liability for the owner, and certainly possibly for the county, and then on top of that for individuals who may suffer whatever happens in spite of, I don't know, Mr. Miles, you're more aware of this, but my understanding, a lot of waivers or those types of documents that people sign sometimes have no validity as far as litigation at some future. So again, my observation again.
I will add that I do know, after speaking with Dr. Park yesterday, that she did have a conversation with Mr. Massetti, and she has relayed his concerns and his wishes to the state. And so that communication has been made to ask for guidance from the state, but we have not received that yet.
This is Supervisor Miller. I'm very uncomfortable holding one business to a completely different standard than we are holding our religious and faith-based gatherings. we're trusting them to abide by the parameters of the public health order. And it has been a great hardship for their parishioners and for their staff. They have also suffered tremendous financial losses through this by not being able to have their congregations gather. And yet they provided very productive protocols that helped the state put forward the ways that they could begin meeting again. And frankly, we don't have the staff to police all of these gatherings. We are trusting them to abide by the order. And as far as I have heard from a number of people who've corresponded with me, they have said, thank you. It's very different now, but it is so good to be able to be allowed to see one another again. We're grateful, and we're going to make this work. I recognize the hardship for our businesses, and I agree with the rest of the board that it is very difficult. But I do not think legally we can fail to enforce our public health order with some businesses and just look the other way, especially now that it has specifically been brought to our attention. I think chaos will ensue. I don't know why anybody would abide by our public health orders then. And this is a public health issue. If it wasn't, they wouldn't be having people sign waivers. There is a very clear acknowledgement that there is a danger not only to the folks who come, but to all the people they come in contact with afterwards, including their families, including healthcare professionals, including hospital personnel, including our first responders. There's a very clear danger involved in these large gatherings. And so I agree with Supervisor Wynn. I don't believe we have any other legal choice other than to make sure that the public health orders are followed. Anybody else want to weigh in?
Yeah, Chair Miller, I'd like to speak. Miguel. Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
just want to say that. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to say I think the operator is doing this in a professional way. He submitted a really good plan. He has sanitizers for everyone. He's allowing only 25% of his capacity. And it's really hard to say no in my beliefs because right across the street's a flea market, and I want to say there was 1,000 people there on Sunday, and there's no guidelines there. And this gentleman is setting up all sorts of precautions to prevent, what everybody's worried about. And throughout our county, there's gatherings. If you go to Costco, Home Depot, these protests are unbelievable. There's 1,000 people at the protest on Monday, and there was no precautions. There was no social distancing. So, this gentleman just wants to create, do something for the community, have a race and stay in business and provide for his family. So I don't see a problem with it. I think, I don't see how we can deny this guy. He did the race last Saturday with no fans, and now he's proposing 25%. If anything, let's tell him, hey, you're limited. His seating capacity is 6,000. Let's tell him 1,000 people and let him, every other county is doing it. People are going to go travel. It's almost like golf. They're going to want to golf. They're going to travel. We can't stop people from what they want to do. This is a perfect example of giving them an opportunity to be responsible. And that's what I believe. I think you can let the operator operate. Thank you.
The difference,
Thank you.
Supervisor may I speak?
I'm concerned with the legal aspects and what kind of a position this puts us in, making this an official action. So I'd like to hear from our public health officer and county council in terms of, we've heard pretty clearly from the state that if you ignore our order, there is definitely jeopardy to your county. So I'd like to hear from Dr. Park and the county council on that, please.
Thank you, Chair Miller. First of all, I came up to the podium to make it clear to Supervisor Villapudua that the difference between the flea market and the racetrack is that the flea market has been given legal permission to operate. I'm sorry that you drove by and that people are not social distancing. That's very disappointing to hear. It's disappointing everywhere when I hear that people are not following the rules and not trying to take care of each other. However, when we legally opened shopping malls and all retail was later opened, that included swap meets and flea markets. And clearly, sporting events with live audiences are in stage 4. So that is how the law has had them segregated. That's not me, that's the governor's lawyers and his team that have put that into stage 4. And I believe you did ask me.
This is Bob Elliott. I also have a question here.
Go ahead, Supervisor Elliott.
Okay, yes, I was trying to get in a little earlier, but realized I was muted. So at any rate, I'd like to clarify some other comments. Sometimes it's been a little difficult to hear exactly what has been said, but I believe there was a comment earlier that the governor had made some kind of exception for protests, just about these protests that are going on. I just find it to be completely nonsensical that law enforcement, I guess, government bodies at every level are looking the other way for all of these protests, and certainly that's a constitutional right to be able to make your voice heard, but nobody is enforcing any of our county ordinances concerning health at these protests, and especially if they are turning violent, as in some cases they have in some cities. So, you know, to try to come down hard on someone who has tried to take some logical precautions here to allow some event to go on, and yet to take no action against people who are openly flouting the public health order in another instance, and to support that kind of activity. And I'm not making any statement at all about whether the protests are logically motivated or not. I'm not saying anything about the motivation behind the protests. I'm looking just at the enforcement of the public health order. So why is there this look the other way at protests of whatever size they are, with no attempt to do social distancing there, and yet we're looking at someone who is submitting a plan to try to engage in some type of control, and we're going to take them to court. You know, our past practice has been to consult with folks, you know, inform them of what the public health order is, make their concerns known, but enforce things that way. And it just seems to me that we have kind of a logical disconnect here, where we are allowing one type of activity which openly flouts the public health order, and then we intend to take someone to court who has been trying to make some precautions, rather than just let's talk with this guy and see if we can come up with something that can solve this problem another way. So
again, Supervisor Elliott.
Why are we looking at these things through two completely different lenses?
Again, with the swap meets and the flea markets, protests were given legal authority to proceed by the governor. When the governor opened up places of worship at 25% or 100 attendees, he, based on constitutional rights, gave the same authority to protest. And so therefore, outdoor protests have the same ability to gather at a 25% capacity of that open space or 100 attendees. And I understand that protests are much larger than 100. I do believe that it would be very difficult to enforce that. And in this day and age, at this time when there is so much emotion and so much discourse in our country, I don't believe that really we can try to limit people who are trying to speak out at a protest for their constitutional rights. Now, having said that, I understand the dilemma that this poses on a person's personal business. And you did make a point, Supervisor Elliott, that there should have been some discourse before we got to this point. And the fact of the matter is there has been. Director Cunningham received this request to have races from the 99 Speedway on May 14th. And there were two proposals, one with no spectators and one with spectators. Both proposals were sent to the state for authorization or denial, and both were denied. And the owner of the Speedway was made aware of that on May 14th, or somewhere around May 14th, whenever the governor's lawyers got back to us. But clearly about a couple of weeks ago, he was already made aware that both types of events had received denials from the state. Thereafter, he made phone calls to Director Cunningham on a quite frequent basis, almost every other day, according to Director Cunningham, in which he asked if there had been any changes, and if there had been any changes on the stance from the state. And Director Cunningham was very clear with him in saying, no, sir, there have been no changes. You are still not allowed or permitted to have your events, whether with spectators or without. And so this discourse has been going on a quite frequent basis, actually. And so this person was informed and was aware of the decision, and there has been conversation.
Chair Miller, I'd like to speak at this moment.
Okay, go ahead. And then I would like, is our CAO present?
Yes.
After Supervisor Patty, I have a question for you. Go ahead, Supervisor.
Excellent. Thank you, Madam Chair. So it almost seems to me, since protests are allowed, maybe we'll just talk with Mr. Nassetti about he can stage an open protest in whatever cause that he's established is worthy and operate with 25% capacity, and we won't have any legal jeopardy in any capacities. County Council, would you agree that, as Dr. Park points out, the governor has allowed protests while he may not be allowing a business operation, so we wouldn't really need to worry ourselves if Mr. Nassetti were to operate a protest with 25% of capacity at his location? It's a public protest. Would that fit the bill of protest, County Council?
Supervisor, if you are proposing that Mr. Nassetti has a legitimate protest and not a race dressed up as a protest, certainly legitimate protests can proceed. However, I think dressing up a race as a protest would not be appropriate.
Well, it may not be appropriate, but it may or may not be legal. So if there's an activity, like for instance, when somebody's protesting downtown, whatever activity is going on around the protest, that's subject to whatever the activity may be. And so to me, this may just not be anything worth addressing at all. I agree with Supervisor Elliott that, I believe we're going too far in trying to restrict what's similar when you have a flea market across the street. And to Dr. Park's point, it may be recognized by the governor as a sanctioned activity, and something similar with even less risk may not be sanctioned, but they're yet being held to a standard that creates a hardship. So I would just suggest, A, we don't need to take an action, and B, we can advise Mr. Nassetti that he has a right to conduct a protest on his at his facility. I yield, and Chair Miller, you may have a question for our CAO.
Yes, I do. And I would also comment on the idea of just calling the race a protest. I think if Mr. Nassetti is going to charge admission and is going to conduct races, I believe it would not be considered a protest. It would be considered a spectator event. That's my own opinion. But it is not an opinion that I would be comfortable committing this county to any sort of liability, because I agree with Supervisor Wynn. If there is any sort of problem with the event, or 2 weeks down the road, there is a large cluster of illness. It is not the Nassettis who will be seen as the deep pockets on lawsuits. It will be San Joaquin County. My question for the county administrator is, we have been informed on numerous occasions that the state intends for the counties as an arm of the state to enforce the state's public health orders, and that if the counties do not, there can and will be repercussions to the individual counties, primarily in the form of loss of reimbursement for COVID expenses and potentially some other negative impacts. Can you comment a little bit on that, specifically what we've been told and what we could expect by the county sanctioning this?
Madam Chair, board members, I have heard on more than one occasion on conference calls, primarily from our county association, CSAC, that we refer to, and also our CAO and CEO association calls, that there is definitely risk to loss of reimbursement as a result of not enforcing the state orders. And I believe there is definitely risk in regards to even our federal dollars, because there are some requirements as far as enforcing the state orders, for instance, with our CARES Act money. I do want to make that statement, but also share with you, at this point, I am not aware of any county that has been penalized financially in that regard, but we have heard from more than one conference call that there is risk in regards to not receiving reimbursement if you are a county or a city that does not enforce the state orders.
So,
okay, county council or county administrator, if we are at risk from losing funds from failing to enforce state orders, why are we not enforcing our public health orders at these demonstrations? And are we at risk of losing money for allowing demonstrations to occur without the appropriate social distancing involved?
I go back to what Dr. Park said. As a result of what the state took action on in regards to protests, there's this level of acceptance in that regard. I'm not saying, Supervisor Elliott, that the social distancing should not be enforced, but what I am saying is because the state has mentioned protests being approved, and I'm not saying that approved in the way they're currently being conducted, because I'm not condoning that. But what I am saying is they have been approved in regards to concept with the appropriate protocols.
Supervisor Elliott, this is Chair Miller. I share your concern in regards to the lack of social distancing and the increased risk from these demonstrations and protests. And I had a conversation earlier with County Council in regards to that, in terms of First Amendment rights and how difficult it is to put any parameters on these. So I'd like to ask County Council to maybe share with the board some of the history of these First Amendment gatherings and what the limitations are in terms of us trying to enforce any sort of parameters or public health orders around these gatherings.
So, thank you, Madam Chair. So, history-wise, the law allows us to place time, place, and manner restrictions on public protest. The protests so far have not occurred in the county; they've all occurred in the cities, and so legal jurisdiction would fall on the police departments as far as their ability to respond to those. The governor's order did extend and does approve of public gatherings, public protests within the same limitations as are imposed on churches. One of the difficulties is these gatherings are rather spontaneous. We don't have 4 days notice or 5 days notice. And our ability, at least to go to court, as I'm proposing here, in order to get a temporary restraining order, there is no individual or entity that we can identify that's truly responsible for these gatherings. So it becomes a bit of a legal nightmare to identify the person even that you're going to file the complaint against and who you would serve it on. Now, as far as, yes, I think that we could certainly ask the police department when they have these gatherings to try and enforce the social distancing protocols, but I anticipate that what we would hear from law enforcement agencies is that they have much greater concerns at those moments, and social distancing falls way down on the list.
So we're only going to enforce our public health order on law-abiding citizens. Have agreed to follow it, and for to agree that they will engage in an authorized activity, but don't wish to follow the public health order while they're doing it, we'll look the other way for that. Is that the way we're operating?
No, sir, not at all. And Sheriff is here, and perhaps he would like to weigh in on the law enforcement aspect of that to respond to your question. But in order to respond on an individual basis at the protest is really an instance of and a responsibility for law enforcement. I, as county council, don't have any authority to do that. My ability is to come to this board and ask for permission, as I'm doing here, to go obtain a temporary restraining order that would prevent some future action.
Well, now, aren't people supposed to get a permit if they're going to stage a demonstration or a protest? Doesn't that require a permit in order for them to do that legally?
I don't know what the requirements are in the city.
Well, it just seems to me that we're bending over backwards to allow a disregard of our public health order in one situation when we're not going to allow it in another. And I think we should enforce our public health order. That's true. But if we're going to do it, we should do it equally. And if we're not going to do it equally, then I don't think we should penalize someone who at least has made an effort to comply.
Supervisor, I would like County Council to comment on this, and perhaps the Sheriff as well. I think one of the key issues here is the protests have occurred within city limits and are not within our jurisdiction to enforce. I know there have been protests in the city of Stockton. There have been and demonstrations. There have also been demonstrations in the city of Tracy, and I believe in the city of Manteca. All of those would fall under the jurisdiction of the various police departments. It's my understanding that we have indeed enforced our public health order in the unincorporated area where we have jurisdiction. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, County Council, you can weigh in, there was a church in the unincorporated area that we did indeed enforce the public health order, and there may have been one or more other instances. Can you comment on that?
Yes, Supervisor Miller. Yes, there is a church. It's actually in the city of Lodi, and jointly with City of Lodi administration, we took action to enforce the county's order there. There have been other instances. There's also a gym in the city of Lodi that we've taken action to enforce the county's order. and then there was also a golf course early on in the whole COVID history where we took some action.
Well, what was that action? Did we actually threaten to take people to court?
Yes, we did.
And did we seek an injunction against them?
No, the golf course closed down, and before I could come to you to get authority to seek the injunction, both the gym and the church in Lodi filed suit against the county.
Okay, so then we just proceeded with the suit to enforce the order.
That's correct.
Chair Miller, this is Sheriff Withrow, if I may speak.
Yes, thank you, Sheriff.
Yeah, I know this is a passionate topic when it comes to our citizens and their businesses and what everyone is going through. Clearly, we're in very interesting times that we're living through right now. Surely happy that my first year and a half I've stepped in at this time, and with the pandemic and now with the protests and unfortunately some looting and violence that has come from people that don't want to peacefully protest. I just want to bring it back around to a human level here and remind everyone here that, you know, I am friends with Mr. Nassetti. I'm a race fan, but my job is to make sure the citizens, all the citizens of San Joaquin County, stay safe. And the checks that you guys are going to write today are going to be cashed on the backs of my officers and the officers of the CHP and surrounding cities. I'm a little tired right now because I've been out every night at protests, and my officers are tired, and yet we're going back at it again tonight, and the next night, and the next night. And to add another thing to our plate, step up and do it. But the law says that this is not supposed to occur. If we had gone down this road and done it properly and gotten permission to do this, then we'd be fine. If the governor or in his law would change the status of his law on this, then it would be fine. But right now, the law says we're not supposed to do it. No, it's not fair that people get to not social distance at these protests. It is legal for them to protest now. The governor is allowing that. And my officers and all the officers in this county and all the officers in the state and across this country are wading into those crowds to make sure they stay safe and expose themselves and their families to this virus. So I'm asking that until it is legal, that we have another public gathering, to please don't allow this. It's just another thing that my officers are going to have to wade into and deal with. And if it's legal, then we won't have to deal with it. So let's remember who this is affecting. It's not just affecting the business owner, and I know it's sorely impacting. It'll be even more impacting if he goes forward with this and ABC steps in and pulls his ABC license, and then we don't get to have an asparagus festival sometime in the future and all those type of things. So let's do this legally. Let's wait until we have authorization to hold an event like this legally so that we don't expose my officers, all the other officers, our citizens, even the citizens that would attend this to more dangers. It's a very strange time, but we have to remember what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with lives. And so I would ask that Mr. Nassetti just hold off until it's legal and continue that legal battle. And he has those steps he can take, and we see that the governor is being more flexible on these things. So I think that battle is with the governor, but until then, you can be sure that law enforcement is going to enforce the laws as they stand.
Thank you, Sheriff, very much. Thank you for your input, for your perspective, and most of all, thank you to you and your entire department for the work that you're doing. We do recognize that you are tired and you are being stretched to your limits, and we appreciate very much the service of all your deputies and yourself who put yourselves out there and expose yourselves to risks to keep the public safe. It is greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, so County Council, would you like to sort of wrap up this discussion, and then we'll call for some final comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just go back to really what Sheriff Withrow has just said. The governor's order puts this type of activity into a particular stage. The clarification that we received yesterday from PH that said that the counties, yes, the counties have the authority to open businesses and sectors of the economy, but only after the state provides the guidance. And so we're still waiting for guidance on a wide variety of sectors and activities. And as that guidance comes down, then Dr. Park will be evaluating the circumstances on the ground to determine that whether it's safe to open up those additional sectors without creating an unacceptable risk to people. But until that guidance is received, we're in a position where these activities that the state has not previously approved and that the county has not previously approved, any operation of those is a violation of both the local and the state order. And as this board discussed at a previous meeting, the ability to respond to that from aside from the law enforcement side for the sheriff is for me to come, as I've done here today, to ask the board to authorize me to pursue the litigation. We think that is that's the appropriate course. That's the legal course, is for the board to make a decision on it. And the decision that's made here today will then guide our actions going forward. The two decisions that I would ask is one for a motion declaring that the emergency situation does exist, and then second, the motion authorizing counsel to file the complaint seeking the restraining order.
Thank you. Do we have any final comments from supervisors?
This is Supervisor Wynn. I really appreciate what Sheriff Withrow said in regards to his officers, and I would respond from the standpoint of having been involved in 3 riots in LA. I will tell you firsthand that no officer or deputy is concerned about social distancing when you're dealing with a bunch of people who are throwing things and doing a whole bunch of things, endangering your personal safety. So in regards to, previous comments about we should be enforcing social distancing in these riots, frankly, that's just absurd. It's not possible. There's too many other things that officers are dealing with to protect themselves and others. The second part of this is if we talk about, as Supervisor Villaputra talked about, the comparisons with Costco and Home Depot and places like that, I don't disagree with that. I think that, this essential, non-essential from the beginning has been misplaced because, again, going back to the formula in regards to time, frequency, and mitigation, I think we can handle almost any situation with any business. If we say that, well, we're not doing it here, so we shouldn't do it here, I think that's kind of a false premise, because earlier we heard from a nail salon, and I've gotten, and I'm sure you all have gotten, frequent emails from salon owners and previously barbershops and hairstylists and a whole bunch of other businesses. And we worked very hard, certainly through County Council and Dr. Park, in regards to addressing these to the state. So if we say, well, we're going to, because this is a business and it's important that they open, and the legal gymnastics we've been trying to jump through to make this happen, is going to fall flat on his face the first time he gets sued, because everybody will see the purpose of creating a false protest for the sake of holding a race. So I would say that we need to continue down the path that we've already traveled in regards to making sure that we do this in an orderly way, a legal way, because there's going to be probably a flood of suits after this is all settled. And I certainly would want to protect the county and the residents and our taxpayers in regards to any kind of litigation that would come against us, because we got outside the bounds of the legality that were offered through the governor. I may not agree with the governor's statement in regards to, how he's handling certain situations, but he is the governor and he is elected and he has that authority, and we don't. So I think if we say, well, we're going to let this happen and we're not going to take any action, and they can open and we'll look the other way, whatever, well, where do you draw the line? Does that then say to the nail salons, well, you can do the same thing and we're going to look the other way? Somewhere along the way, somebody's going to get caught. And if we are certainly publicly aware of this situation and fail to take any action, we're on the hook. So again, I think this is appropriate. I may not particularly like it because I understand the business owner's perspective, but on the other side of it, there's only certain things we can do, and certainly we need to do them properly. Otherwise, county council will be representing us in some type of litigation in the future. So anyway, and one last question, though. We talked about the reimbursement part as far as any kind of sanctions. Has there been any talk, because I keep reading about, the governor and them talking about, rescinding on the attestation in regards to our ability to make decisions? Would we possibly lose that authority if we don't adhere to what the governor and the California Department of Public Health have directed us to do?
Supervisor Nguyen, and Dr. Park might be able to speak from the public health perspective, but what I've been told, both from attesting as a county, along with them tying to being able to attest and having some fiscal related outcome as a result of attesting and not abiding by orders, we've always been told that once you attest, the state does not want to be in the role to withdraw it from a county or a municipality. So we've heard that over and over again, but I have heard more than once, as I said earlier, not enforcing the state orders puts funding at risk.
Well, I know they've talked about any kind of increase and things like that we may have to go back and reimpose certain restrictions. So I guess my question is, would the state look at us as unfavorably if we didn't follow basically the guidelines that have been provided?
So my understanding, and like I said, Dr. Park can speak about it from a public health perspective, but I've been told, and as I said, both from a fiscal but also attesting, that would be done locally. That authority would lie with Dr. Park. Once a county attests, then us rolling back is very much data driven based upon where our metrics are, especially if they go in a more unfavorable area. That would be the authority that would lie with Dr. Park. But Dr. Park, I know you know a lot more about it.
So when we wrote our attestation, the attestation did include a section asking what you as a county would use as your metric to decide when you would roll back and reclose businesses that had been opened. So as the metric to use, I put the measure that I'm getting from Chuck Davis of Bayesiant, which is that 3-day moving hospitalization increase in percentage, which I presented to the board before. That is the metric that I attested that I would be using to decide when to reclose. After that process occurred, the state then came out with their own monitoring metrics that they are imposing on us. So the question was raised, which metrics do we follow? The one that the state is giving us or the one we attested to the state? And it appears that we're going to have to use the state's metrics. and we can add that to the metric that we said we would use, but it would only be additional. So the governor is slated to announce this, and I believe the plan was that he was going to talk about this in his press release today. Initially, they were calling it something like a county watch list. Now they're calling it a monitoring list. But basically, they're using 3 sets of metrics to decide when to target a county and ask that county to consider reclosing businesses that were previously opened in Stage 2. So that is the concern, is that as we reopen, our numbers are getting bigger, our case counts increasing. Since a couple of weeks ago, I believe that's reflective of the Memorial Day weekend too, when people were having parties and gatherings, and reflective, of course, of all the businesses that are opening and of people being out and about. So unfortunately, our numbers are going up, and I am worried about crossing that threshold and being on the list.
Well, thank you for that information.
Chair Miller, I have a question for Dr. Park while she's in the seat with a microphone. When you say numbers are going up, and that's, of course, that's of concern, would that also be attributed perhaps to the expansion of testing?
Yes, certainly. So it's everything combined. We have to ask for additional testing, and we are really encouraging the public to get tested. And of course, as we test more, we're finding more. That is the intention of testing, is to find people who may be asymptomatic and yet be able to spread disease, and to find people who are symptomatic who are not getting tested. But as you test more, you're going to find more, and so that's another factor as well.
Sure. Are deaths going up? Are deaths or hospitalizations going up?
At this point, our last 3-day moving average is still at 0.3 for hospitalization rates. Our case counts are going up, but not our hospitalization rates. And deaths, we add on another death every few days. So that
just happened. That's just normal. As we're doing more testing, we find out more people might be asymptomatic, which I understand could be 90-something% of anybody that has COVID is asymptomatic. They're not showing signs. And I know we can go real deep into this discussion. The discussion today at hand is if we're going to take legal action to prevent a vendor from doing something. And, I would ask that perhaps we stay on track with that as we seem to be wrapping up. But as we expand testing, we'll find out more people are positive, and we do need to watch out for triggers. My concern is that, we're here in San Joaquin County. Dr. Park's hands are tied. I mean, there's without question, she isn't allowed flexibility or levity, and she isn't even allowed common sense. Her job is to follow state protocols. And I understand that and recognize that's a very difficult position to be in. We currently have a situation that San Joaquin County seems to be the one county. There are other counties that have racetracks that are allowing, may not be sanctioned, may not be approved, but there are races happening throughout this state as it is, similar to what was happening with golf. So I've got a concern if we're imposing something that other counties aren't doing, and other counties have racetracks operating, but yet we're going to impose a restriction on operating the same types of races or gatherings that are happening elsewhere. I don't think that's fair, as Supervisor Elliott points out. I think, and I'll make a motion, and it could be followed up. There may be more discussion, but I'd make a motion to dismiss this request for an emergency and dismiss the action to get a restraining order or any illegal action against Mr. Nassetti and the Tony Nassetti Group Incorporated. But I'm open for more conversation, or somebody may want to second this and take it to a vote and see where it goes. But I really think that it's unfair. If we want to talk to Mr. Nassetti and tell him that he can have a voluntary protest and let people gather to whatever capacity that's been state recognized and allowed, then maybe he'll call his gathering on Saturday if it's planned, if that's when it's planned, he'll call it a protest instead of a sanctioned event of any sort. But I don't think that the county needs to bother with this issue. That's I do make that as a motion.
I totally agree with.
Hang on one second. I want to run this past county council. It's my understanding that the only thing before us that has been agendized is to take up this particular recommendation, and that if we opt not to, that we simply don't move on this item. I am very hesitant to actually introduce a separate motion that basically puts the county in the position of sanctioning this, and even worse, suggesting and sanctioning dressing up the race as a protest. I would like some guidance from county council that if this board opts not to move forward with the requested restraining order and injunction, that the appropriate action for this board would be to take no action. County council?
Under the Brown Act, you are limited to the item that is on the agenda as far as the ability to take action on anything or have discussions beyond that. Because it's brought under 54956.5 as an emergency meeting, there is a sort of predicate requirement of the finding of the emergency and then action on the second one. It wasn't clear to me whether Supervisor Patty's second motion was simply a motion to deny the request to file the legal complaint, or whether incorporated in that motion was also the discussion of offering advice to Mr. Noccetti on how he might proceed otherwise. Perhaps Supervisor Patty would clarify what his motion was.
Sure. Thank you, County Council. My motion would be to dismiss and not take any action, which might fit along with what the concerns that Chair Miller has brought up. And subsequent to that, if somebody wants to talk to Mr. Noccetti and kind of inform him, separate from any action from the board and us not being responsible, but Mr. Noccetti might want to be informed of what the governor is allowing, and he can follow that protocol. But that wouldn't be a sanctioned action by the board. I understood that would be a concern, and so for clarity, I would just motion that, or if no action is required, my motion is that we take no action if that better fills the necessity as it stands.
And I would second that motion.
Chair Miller, I still have a comment here and a question.
Yes. I was going to go through and ask for final comments for the rest of the supervisors. So, Supervisor Elliott, please go ahead.
Okay, so I just wanted to confirm here with County Council. So this proposed action today to issue a restraining order, you're telling me that that is consistent with the actions we have taken in the past in cases where there is an activity planned that is going to be counter to our public health order. Is this consistent?
It is, Supervisor Elliott, it is consistent with the process that we have previously outlined. As I stated, in the other cases, before I had the opportunity to come to the board to seek authority to file the TRO, those in case of the golf course, they complied. And in case of the gym and the church, they filed their own action to try and restrain the county's order, which the federal court has issued orders in both of those cases upholding the county's order.
Okay. I think that while there are in outcomes here, no matter what we do in this case, and I think that our bottom line position should be equal application of the law. If this action today is consistent with what we have been doing to enforce the public health order in the past, then logic would say that we should uphold the law and do it in a way that we have deemed to be fair in the past. I do agree with the previous comment that if we say that this particular tender is authorized to go ahead and without being in compliance with the law, then we are opening ourselves up to letting anyone go ahead and open their business, whether they're in compliance with the law or not. I also take exception to the governor's handling this whole situation. Last Friday news conference, he created the impression that we were moving into phase 3, and actually in the past he has selectively cherry-picked activities that had previously been listed in phase 3 of the roadmap to recovery and moved them into phase 2 just on his own initiative. But he gave the impression that we were moving into phase 3, and on, I would say, dozens of occasions made the same statement that the state would issue guidelines and the counties were in absolute control of the pace at which they moved, leading people to the expectation that counties were in fact going to control their own. Then we got clarification over the ensuing days that, well, no, that's not really what he meant. What he meant was that the state has absolute control over the at which counties move by controlling the pace at which they issue the further lines on how it can be done. So therefore, the state is still in absolute control of the pace at which counties can move. And I just disagree with the way he is speaking out of both sides of his mouth on this issue. So at any rate, the clarification has come down that no, we actually cannot go ahead and authorize activities which are in later phases until the guidelines have come down. On a call yesterday with Cal-RES for the region to the north of the state, I've raised that issue and urged them to go ahead and get the guidelines out so that we can move forward with further opening. But until that occurs, we're not in regulations and administrative guidelines and the public health orders that have been issued in the past. So I think based on that, to be consistent and do the best we can at the county level to deal with a situation that has been purposely made murky at the state level, I think we need to just uphold our order. I would ask that in doing this, that we confer with Mr. Nosetti one more time, that we authorize the county council to take this legal action if required. But let's talk with him one more time and see if we can just reasonably agree that he should postpone this event until it has become an authorized type of event to have. That's the only way that we at the county level can try to maintain an equal application of the law. According to the county council, that's the approach we have taken in the past, although we have never actually had to file an injunction, and I hope we don't have to file one this time either. But I think we should continue to be consistent with that. Otherwise, we are creating a chaotic situation ourselves. And while I agree that when people are rioting, it is not reasonable to try to attempt to get them to social distance. I mean, that is ridiculous to think about that. The reason I brought that up is to point out the obvious inequality and the obvious differences in the way we are approaching the public health aspects of things. Once a demonstration becomes a riot, then of course you can't control what's going on because you're not speaking then with people who are interested at all in complying with the law. You're dealing with people who are breaking the law by rioting. But nonetheless, I just wanted to point out the fact that we're looking at authorized activities and disregarding the public health order in one case, but then in the other case we're going to threaten somebody with taking them to court. even though they tried to comply with the public health order. So looking at the public health order, that's not fair. Looking at maintaining equal application of the law, as we have attempted to do it at the county level, I think we have no choice but to inform Mr. Nassetti that the county will take legal action if necessary to protect the public health and comply with the public health order. But let's have a reasonable conversation with Mr. Nassetti before we do that. I hope that we will not have to take that action.
Thank you, Supervisor Elliott. I'm going to come back to you in just a minute to see if you want to make that in the form of a motion. But right now, we have a motion and a second on the floor to take no action. So I'm going to ask the clerk, unless there are any final comments on this, but I would prefer to have the clerk take, first let us know if any public comments have been received, and then to take a roll call vote on Supervisor Patty's motion, which was seconded by Supervisor Villapudua.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are no further public comments at this time, so I will begin the roll call vote. Supervisor Villapudua?
Yes.
Supervisor Patty? Yes. Supervisor Nguyen?
No.
Supervisor Elliott?
No.
And Chair Miller?
No.
Okay. That motion fails, 3 noes to 2 yeses.
Thank you. Supervisor Elliott, I would like to come back to you now and ask if, and I think your addition of reaching out to Mr. Nassetti is excellent. It would be my hope as well that he would agree to postpone until, in accordance with what we heard the sheriff say, that he can do this legally. So I would like to ask if you would like to make the motion on making the finding for an emergency, authorizing county council to seek a restraining order and injunction after contacting the Nassettis and the Nassetti group to see if this can be resolved without actually having to seek the injunction.
Okay. I will move that we authorize the council to take the actions that he has requested, that we reach out to Mr. Nassetti first to conduct a reasonable discussion and notify him that the county council has been authorized to take that action. However, we request that he postpone his event until such time as it can be authorized appropriately.
And will your motion also include making the finding for the emergency to authorize this action today?
Yes.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second. Supervisor Nguyen.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. I'd like to ask the clerk to please take a roll call vote.
Supervisor Villapudua?
No.
Supervisor Patty?
No, 1,000 times.
Supervisor Nguyen?
Yes.
Supervisor Elliott?
Yes.
And Chair Miller?
Yes.
That vote passes 3-0.
Thank you.
You too.
Do we have any final comments from County Council? Is there any wrap-up that you want to provide to the board or to the public on this?
No, but I will follow up from this meeting today. I'll finalize documents, plan to file them today, but I will reach out as soon as I leave here to Mr. Nassetti, and hopefully we can come to some agreement that doesn't put the public at risk.
Thank you. I would just like to say before we adjourn that I think the entire board, and I think it's been reflected in the comments, we understand how difficult this is for our businesses, and we share their frustration. We are simply in a legal position as a county to enforce the state's laws. And it's never easy choices, but that is our responsibility and the job that we've been elected to do. So we are going to go ahead then and adjourn until next Tuesday, June 9th, 2020 at 9 a.m. back in the board chambers. And this concludes our emergency meeting. Thank you, everyone.